Vyacheslav Soloviev was born on March 12, 1970 in Yaroslavl. He grew up in a full family. His father and mother were ordinary laborers. In childhood, the boy was no different from his peers. In the year 1988, he went into the army and was in the division of internal troops named after Dzerzhinsky, where he received a serious cranial trauma after falling from the tower. After that, the young man began to have outbursts of uncontrollable rage. Hello, this is Defunct City. Subscribe to our channel and don't forget to click on the bell so you don't miss new episodes and stay up to date. According to some reports, while in the hospital, Soloviev strangled his roommate with a pillow after an argument. But he got away with it. The case was hushed up. After returning home, Vyacheslav got married. He met his future wife Olga, who waited for him from the army, in high school. The young family settled in a 3-room apartment on Leningrad Prospect, which Olga's stepfather gave to the young couple. In 1929, their daughter Nastya was born. I love you very much. I have no one but you. I understand that it's not enough to prove your love with words. Vyacheslav wrote to his wife when she was in the maternity ward. Soloviev's wife was a housewife, raised flowers, took her daughter to art school, and took care of her husband, who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Vyacheslav was making good money. Not long after studying at the local Polytechnic Institute, he abandoned his studies and opened his own firm. In 2002, Soloviev watched the movie The Young Poisoner's Handbook, dedicated to the life of serial killer Graham Young. And then he read Agatha Christie's detective novel, Whitehorse Villa, which described poisoning with thallium. These stories fascinated Vyacheslav so much that he decided to experiment with poisons. At a local business, Soloviev bought various preparations, including 400 grams of thallium sulfate, for which he paid 2,500 rubles. Vyacheslav studied the recipes of deadly mixtures in the library and made 4 kinds of poison. First, he tested the poison on himself, each time saving himself with a pre-prepared antidote, and then the Soloviev's cat became his test subject. The animal, to which the experimenter poured the powder in a bowl with food, soon died. The poisoner did not stop at the cat after another quarrel with his wife, who, as Vyacheslav would later say, he was fed up with. He began to add poison to her food. After a piece of fried fish, which Soloviev stuffed with Olga's poison, it became bad. She was hospitalized, but then the poison portion was small, and the woman survived. But even at this, Vyacheslav did not stop and continued to poison his wife for several months. Olga rapidly lost weight, but she put it down to exercise and the effect of acupuncture. However, in December 2003, her condition rapidly deteriorated. She fell into a coma and soon died despite all the efforts of doctors. The pathologists could not determine the exact cause of death. An autopsy showed that the deceased had liver and kidney failure. Sometime after his wife's death, Vyacheslav outlined a new victim, his neighbor Mikhail. Soloviev hated him for his excessive addiction to alcohol. Mikhail would sometimes get drunk and go to sleep in the common vestibule, preventing his neighbor from getting home. The last straw for Soloviev was the theft of a car battery, which he carelessly left at the front door. The poisoner attributed the theft to an alcoholic neighbor and began to prepare revenge. One day he invited Mikhail to visit, bought vodka and cooked red caviar with poison. The maniac knew that the neighbor would not refuse a delicacy and which. But Mikhail suddenly went on a binge and disappeared for several days. Soloviev had to hide the poisoned caviar in the fridge. When he left for work, some of the caviar was eaten by his daughter, 14-year-old Nastya. On the same day, she ended up in the hospital. The girl's condition worsened every day. Her hair fell out and her leg began to fall off. The doctors performed numerous examinations and took all sorts of tests, but they were unable to determine the cause of her illness. The father didn't even try to save his daughter and didn't tell her about the poison. That's why I didn't tell the doctors about the poison. I was afraid of being found out that my wife was poisoned. confessed Vyacheslav Soloviev during the interrogation. After suffering for a few months, Nastya died in August of 2004. Soloviev told her neighbors that the girl had not survived her mother's death and committed suicide. Shortly thereafter, Vyacheslav closed his firm, sold his apartment, and moved in with a new acquaintance who was a trader at the local market and lived on Uritsky Street. Soloviev's father, who held a position at an oil refinery, helped him get a job. Thanks to his connections, he got Vyacheslav a job as a supply engineer at a construction company. In his new position, Vyacheslav slowly poisoned his co-workers. He slipped poison into a decanter of water that stood in his office, and then watched as co-workers complained of nausea, stomach pains, and hair loss. They were frightened and blamed it on traces of heavy metals on the premises. However, the expertise, which was carried out by the invited specialists, did not confirm that version. One of Soloviev's colleagues was less fortunate than the others. He was hospitalized several times and his legs couldn't move. And then the turn came to the sender's new chosen one. 6 months after they started living together, Irina began to annoy him. In April of 2005, he put poison in his roommate's coffee. I didn't want to kill her. I just wanted to scare her. That is, to make her feel bad, that's all. After the first time, she did not give in to my provocation with her health condition. And the second time I decided to use more, and it turned out that it led to her death, admitted later Vyacheslav Soloviev. After the second dose of poison, Irina died. The murderer told doctors that encephalitis was the cause of death. Allegedly, not long before her death, Irina was bitten by a tick. Soloviev's doctors believed him for some reason, but his father suspected something was wrong and shared his scary conjecture with the prosecutor's office. However, they did not take Soloviev's words seriously. If Slav had been detained in 2005, years after my first appeal, how many lives would have been saved? Soloviev told the media. Upon learning of this, Vyacheslav began to threaten his parent and said that he had come to the very brink of the abyss. But his father still tried to warn Soloviev's new lover, acrobatics coach Oksana, with whom he got together in the fall of 2006 year. But the woman, who alone was raising 2 young daughters and was insanely happy to see a man in the house, only brushed off a relative with his suspicions. The poisoner appeared to be a model family man. He drove his common-law wife to a sports training camp, and at the same time he took care of his stepdaughters. However, over time he began to feel hatred for the new chosen one. However, before he could deal with Oksana, Soloviev had time to poison the officer of the Dzerzhinsky police station, Captain Vyacheslav Sherbakov. Soloviev was interrogated by him in August of 2006 on the case of a mass brawl that took place in February of that year in one of the city's cafes. During the conflict, the poisoner stabbed his attacker, and during the interrogation, Captain Sherbakov tried to find out who had instigated the fight. But Soloviev did not like the pressure with which the investigator was conducting the conversation. Seizing a moment when Sherbakov was distracted, Soloviev slipped poison into his coffee cup. Later, Sherbakov's partner drank coffee from the same mug. Despite the fact that the woman was suffering from palpitations and dizziness for a long time, she survived, but the captain did not live long. In August of 2006, he died of a pulmonary artery thrombus caused by poisoning. As for Soloviev, he was eventually found guilty of the stabbing, but got a suspended sentence. Having poisoned the captain, Soloviev decided to kill another mistress. When they went together to visit Oksana's grandmother, who lived in the village of Red Profintern, he put the powder in a decanter of morses. After drinking it, Oksana fell ill, thinking that she fell ill with flu. However, thanks to her good health, she survived. And for her grandmother, poisoned morsel was a verdict. She died. In March of 2007, the poisoner began poisoning Oksana's sister Natalia, her husband Evgeny, and 1-year-old son Sasha. Soloviev slipped the poison into a jar of water from which the whole family, including the baby, drank. Sasha was the first one to get to the hospital. He suddenly began to fall, wheezing and gasping for air. The The frightened parents called an ambulance, and the boy was rushed to the intensive care unit. Doctors fought for his life all night, but they couldn't save him. Sasha, who was destined to become Solovyov's last victim, died in the morning, and a couple of days later Natalia and Evgeny were brought to the clinic directly from their son's funeral. They started vomiting and had a fever. At first the doctors diagnosed them both with pneumonia, but the treatment didn't work. The spouses were getting worse and worse. Yaroslavl doctors did not have good laboratories to conduct complex tests, so they decided to turn to specialists from St. Petersburg for help. Toxicologists from the northern capital were immediately alerted to the symptoms of a strange disease that has struck Natalia and Yevgeny. Both their hair fell out in shreds. Special tests showed a large amount of thallium in both their bodies. When they brought the tests back, the doctor's hair stood on end. They said I had more than 10 times the lethal dose. I don't know how I am still alive. My blood was drained, plasma was pumped out, I was given sodium chloride. That's a kind of cleaning, a peculiar one. It is called plasmapheresis. The first time the doctor drained the plasma, I saw him shiver. He started shaking. He showed me the plasma, it was black. Eugene later told one of the newspapers. When doctors understood what was going on, they immediately started treatment of poisoning, and the couple went on the mend, but Yevgeny remained an invalid for life. After signing out of the hospital, they applied to the local police department, having studied the family's closest circle of acquaintances. Investigators finally turned their attention to Solovyev. There were too many suspicious deaths around him. After examining the man's workplace, secretly from him, the detectives found a strange computer disk in a desk drawer. It turned out that in his leisure time Solovyev studied how to turn a man into a zombie. Stored at his work and a disc of the film about the poisoner Graham Young, as well as printed out frames from this film. Vyacheslav was followed, and soon the police saw him heading for the abandoned warehouses in his company's territory, near which he had been digging in the ground for some time. Having waited for Solovyev to return to his workplace, the investigators examined the place where he had been and found a strange vial of white powder. Some of the substance was taken for examination, which confirmed that the vial contained poison based on thallium. In May of the year 2007, the 37-year-old maniac was detained at the moment when he was digging out the vial. By the way, a few days earlier Solovyev had found himself at the center of a scandal in his own company. Surveillance cameras recorded him spraying a gas can in the toilet. Investigators decided to exhume all the deceased associated in life with the poisoner, and forensic experts found thallium in all remains. However, Solovyev did not deny his involvement in poisoning. At interrogations he would tell with rapture sometimes 12 hours about circumstances of death of each of his 6 victims. The poisoner said that he visited the graves of the women he poisoned every year. At first he was silent only about the case with investigator Sherbakov, but then he confessed to it as well. A psychiatric expertise declared Solovyev sane. However, after the first court session the maniac tried to commit suicide right in the court building. He managed to save it, but after that there was a break in the case. First, the defendant underwent the treatment, and then the experts held another examination. But even this time the verdict of the psychiatrists remained the same. Solovyev was sane. This decision was quite satisfactory for the defendant. Unlike most maniacs who dream of going to a mental hospital instead of the cells, the poisoner did not want to be subjected to compulsory treatment. Having familiarized himself with the arguments of the investigation, the father of the maniac actually abandoned his son, cursed him, and demanded a harsh punishment for him. And Solovyev's mother, who until the last moment did not believe in her son's involvement in the deaths of Olga and Nastya, went to court hearings and was present at the sender's last word. Solovyev had carefully prepared for his final speech and wrote it down in a notebook. The maniac did not apologize to the victim's relatives and only complained about his health. Disability of the second group, hepatitis and hypertension. He also noted that he had voluntarily confessed to all the crimes and asked not to punish him too severely. They want to give me the maximum punishment. But we did not live in the Middle Ages, when everything is ruled by the Inquisition, said Vyacheslav Soloviev in court. However, the court was not impressed by the defendant's monologue and sentenced the maniac to life imprisonment and about 1 million rubles to be paid in favor of the victim's relatives. However, Soloviev never made it to the minimum security colony. In December of 2008, the poisoner died in solitary confinement in Yaroslavl pre-trial detention center. The cause was phlegmon, purulent inflammation of the subcutaneous tissues, which against the background of diabetes turned out to be fatal for the convict. It is also possible that the experiments with poisons, which Soloviev conducted on himself, played their role. His confessor involuntarily became myself. Before his death, Soloviev opened his soul to me. He confessed that he was being dragged to the other world, the soul of the children he had poisoned. Dying, he said that he was to blame for their deaths and that this atrocity would not pass in vain for him. God would punish him. He begged me to invite a priest to his cell to confess his sins. But I didn't make it in time. He started vomiting and fell into a coma, said an employee of the Yaroslavl detention center about the death of the maniac sender Vyacheslav Soloviev. See you on the Defunct City soon.